Hey, what's up? It's Silas here. This is my reading of the Constitution of the United States of America. I'm doing this in several parts. Have already read the actual Constitution itself, the Constitution of the United States. In this one, I'm going to be reading Amendments 1 through 10, which constitute what is known as the Bill of Rights. And I will follow it up with reading Amendments 11 to 27 in a different location. Okay, getting into that. If you're watching the video version of this, there will be a speed drawing of Thomas Jefferson. He was the one who drafted the American Bill of Rights, which was inspired by Jefferson, and this was in September 25th of 1789, and the document was ratified on December 15th of 1791. So I went with James Madison of this one. As I mentioned, he did draft this, and it was inspired by Thomas Jefferson. He also drafted the Constitution, but this is something that somebody came up with, wrote it down, but this changes. This changes to what was happening with it. Somebody comes to certain ideas. You can amend what you write. Just because one person wrote it doesn't mean it sticks as it is. Just because one thing was said at one time doesn't mean it's written in stone per se, but you can add and adjust to it, and I think that flexibility is a key part of the United States of America being the country that it is today, and the inspiration to other people as well, and something that I think can still be built on. It's something they knew at the start, and it's something that I think is still true today. It doesn't necessarily have to just be completely thrown out. But let me actually get to the content, and before I actually get to reading, where you can make up your own mind on that, I'll give about a 10-minute or so preamble about just my thoughts on the topic. So I'm reading this from archive.gov, the main site from the United States of America government that has this document so that you can find this information. I was recently thinking about elections, as a lot of people in the world might have been. As I'm recording this is November 11th of 2020, and there's still a very contentious issue with the recent election for presidency in the United States of America. But coming up to the election, and in the last 4 years, and even before that, I've been wondering about the United States of America and nations in general and how countries are constituted. So I thought, okay, the Constitution is one of the key parts. But when someone says, oh, we're fighting for America's soul, oh, this person is kind of destroying America's values, oh, these are America's interests, oh, this is the America that we want to have, make America great again. What are the actual things that are being mentioned by America there? So I thought with this situation where they have essentially universal suffrage, they have some limitations on age and felonies and things like that, but when people vote, when people decide to actually make a decision based on something and trying to achieve a certain thing, before they even vote, what are they voting on? What is the prerequisite? What is the knowledge? What is the thing that informs that decision? What is the goal of that vote? And I thought, okay, maybe it's the vote for the United States of America president, for the executive branch, so it would make sense to have an understanding of what the country was. And then I thought, okay, do people even know what the Constitution of the United States is? Is this something like the terms and condition of a website? Is this something like the Gospels of theologies, where people don't actually read it, but still claim to believe in what actually has been based off of that content, off of that document? So to that end, I thought, how many actual voters have read the Constitution of the United States of America outside of the compulsory schooling that they may have attended, or even some college courses? And I would venture to say it might even be as low as less than 50%. I'm not quite sure. They might be places I can go and look after this and check it out. But now when it comes to people from other countries, what makes your country different? Kenya just had a constitution, and I might get to reading that over into one of these presentations after I'm done with this one. But other countries look at the United States of America and base what they're doing now and think, if we do something similar, maybe we can achieve some of what the United States of America is. So with reading these, I'm kind of thinking, is this something that is actually the basis of what the way the nation actually is? Is this something other countries can look at and copy and actually have some kind of basis of some success in the future and be more American-like if you think that is a positive thing? Or are these things that you deny when somebody says, I repudiate the United States of America, I don't like this country, we need to throw this out? Is these the things that they're talking about that they want thrown out? So those are just some of the interests that I have that play a part of why I'm actually reading this. Some years back, I also read the Declaration of Independence. And I looked at it, looked at the state of the United States of America, how some people had been claiming for certain things that, to my understanding of the nation, were kind of against the independence. And to that end, I rewrote it as a declaration of your dependence. And that's also going to be linked somewhere around here. You can check that out as well. And there might be a way where I can do this with the Bill of Rights or something, where I feel there are some people who seem to want to invert or change some of these things and consider them negative. And I am rather happy with what has come from this. And this is something that I think Bill Whittle said it first. Somebody else might have said it, but he made an observation about the Constitution, and he said, if you look at the state of the United States of America as it is today, and you are a constitutionalist, or whatever way you want to look at it, you can say the Constitution either enabled the nation to become what it is today, or was unable to stop it becoming what it is today. And with that, it's a question, are these things still valid? Is it time to scrap this and restart anew? Can we still use, or can anybody still learn from this and use it as a document? Is it still a living document? Are we supposed to translate it the way it was actually written and think, okay, what did they actually mean by that time? How flexible is this actual content? And that's one thing to kind of think about. And I think doing that Declaration of Your Dependence kind of gave me a good point of view on attempting to see how some of these things could be twisted around, or what could the opposite be of these things. So that's just something to keep in mind as I'm reading this, or it might help you when you actually start talking about this content and say, okay, this was really horrible stuff, or this is stuff we don't need. What is the option? What is the opposite? What would you do without these things? And then also think about the context of when these things were actually written and put out. So reading from the site here, the Bill of Rights, and it says the Constitution might never have been ratified if the framers hadn't promised to add a Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution gave citizens more confidence in the new government and contained many of today's Americans' most valued freedoms. And with the current contentious time, there are certain aspects about the nation I think most Americans agree on, and there are other parts like the Electoral College that get certain people rather polarized. But I think the Constitution itself has this amendment process where you get the convention of states, which I think is 3/4 of the states call the convention together, and they sit down and they can ratify certain amendments. And one in particular that I don't think the amendments for the Electoral College are in the first 10, if I recall right, in the little looking over that I've done. It might have been 11 or 13 or something in 11 to 27. But when you have that, if you think the direct vote is actually more effective for a presidential vote, a popular vote in that sense, than having the Electoral College system, then why don't you have a direct vote within the states to get enough senators and congresspeople to the point where there's enough political backing to actually call a convention of states and then make your case there? That is one of the things that I think is a positive part about this system, and with the amendments are part of what we'll actually be able to see, that this was a key part to actually building this nation and giving it some flexibility even with the foundation of the Constitution that was in September 17th of 1787. Okay, so there's a few other things they say here on the site before I get into the reading. Say, what does it say? How did it happen? The history of the document. How was it made? The creation of the parchment of the document. Where can I learn about the Bill of Rights? And then how can I visit the Bill of Rights and read a transcript? So we'll get into reading the transcript right now, but there's a lot of more information on this site if you'd like to actually check it out for yourself, and that's, again, archives.gov. Okay. The Bill of Rights, a transcription. On this page, There's going to be a transcription of the 1789 Joint Resolution of Congress proposing 12 amendments to the United States Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights, which is the preamble to the Bill of Rights, and amendments 1 through 10. There's a note here. The following text is a transcription of the enrolled original of the Joint Resolution of Congress proposing the Bill of Rights, which is on permanent display in the rotunda at the National Archives Museum. The spelling and punctuation reflects the original. On September 25th, 1789, the First Congress of the United States proposed 12 amendments to the Constitution. The 1789 Joint Resolution of Congress proposing the amendments is on display in the rotunda in the National Archives Museum. 10 of the proposed 12 amendments were ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures on December 15, 1791. The ratified articles, Articles 3 through 12, constitute the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, or the United States Bill of Rights. In 1992, 203 years after it was proposed, Article 2 was ratified as the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. Article 1 was never ratified. Transcription of the 1789 Joint Resolution of Congress proposing 12 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Congress of the United States began and held at the city of New York on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 1789. The conventions of a number of states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution, expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent end of its institution. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring that the following articles be proposed to the legislatures of several states as amendments to the Constitution of the United States, all or any of which articles, when ratified by 3/4 of said legislatures, to be valid to all intents and purposes, as part of said Constitution, viz. Articles in addition to and amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America, proposed by Congress and ratified by the legislatures of several states pursuant to the 5th article of the original Constitution. Article the First. After the first enumeration required by the first article of the Constitution, there shall be one representative for every 30,000, until the number shall amount to 100, after which the proportion shall be so regulated by Congress that there shall be not less than 100 representatives, nor less than one representative for every 40,000 persons, until the number of representatives shall amount to 200. After which the proportion shall be so regulated by Congress that there shall not be less than 200 representatives, nor more than one representative for every 50,000 persons. Article the Second. No law varying the compensation for the services of senators and representatives shall take effect until after election of representatives shall be intervened. Article the Third. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Article the Fourth. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Article the Fifth. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in the manner to be prescribed by law. Article the Sixth. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, house, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Article the 7th. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be put twice in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Article the 8th. In all criminal persecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Article the 9th. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Article the 10th. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Article the 11th. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Article the 12th. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Attest, and I think these are the people who signed it, Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg, Speaker of the House of Representatives, John Adams, Vice President of the United States and President of the Senate, John Beckley, Clerk of the House of Representatives, Sam A. Otis, Secretary of the Senate. So that's it. Those were the proposed one. And as mentioned, the first one has not been ratified, and number 2 was ratified recently, relatively recently, in 1990, I think they said, by as the 27th Amendment. So here now they have, following this, just the Bill of Rights and the actual ones that were ratified. And as mentioned, this was done later on, a few years later. What's that? 2 years later, about 2 years later, in 1791. So with this one, I'm going to just go and read them from the Amendment 1 through 10. And as mentioned again, that's the proposed Amendment 3 through 12. So I'll read Amendment 1 through 10, just give some general overview of what I think it was about and what you think it's about. You can just pause and just think of what was actually read in there. What do you think these things about? And also as I read them again, you can pause after I read it and give some thoughts again. I think some things bear repeating. As you can see from the general state of affairs going on in the world, especially in the United States of America, seems to be a significant amount of people who may not really understand some of these constitutional amendments or the Constitution itself, or value it, and maybe it is more off of ignorance versus actually being aware of it and not knowing it. Let me know. But I know for me personally, when you can read something, hear it, and say it out loud, it's a way to get the content to actually sit and settle in your mind to get to a point of understanding. There's a difference between hearing something, listening to something, and then knowing something. I think those are 3 different categories. This information and knowledge are not necessarily the same thing. Okay, so let's go with the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this one is one of the most common ones, and to me is one of the most precious things about it. And I think it's underestimated how unique it was to have a nation, especially at that time, even in current year, to enshrine the right to have freedom of speech, to actually share and discuss ideas. That already gives a lot of people options versus the general state of nature, the general state of nurture, the general state of human nurture, where people were afraid to speak. And I think that is one of the terrifying things about the current time is the suppression of information during this information age, where I think we can really lead to an age of understanding if we actually embrace this and go back to a free and open sharing of information, not have, oh, this is taboo, oh, this person isn't allowed to speak about this, oh, what you say isn't worthwhile because of just how you happen to have been born. Those are not positive things, and that leads, I think, to very negative situations and anti-human flourishing kind of situations. A few things in here. They're talking about respecting an establishment of a religion. People say it's a Judeo-Christian country. I question some of that. I think the founding fathers were split between Christians and deists. There were, I think, a few Jewish ones. But I think it could have informed their worldview, but it's clearly not part of the core of the nation. It's not in there. And I think that is also a positive thing, even though I think statism has become a bit of a religion, the worship of the state, the worship of the government in that sense, that is part of the foundation of some of the major issues going on in the country and the world. Because that sort of thinking is what underlies that blasphemy type of thing, where you can't speak this, you can't talk about this, this is a taboo thing, these are dirty people, these people are evil just inherently. That's, I think, very negative to actual cohesion and coexistence. Okay, what else was in here? I think the right for the people peaceably to assemble. I think when I read it, I said to peaceably assemble, but this is a key thing as well. That was just being able to actually come together. This thing, I think, again, I see certain protests and events in America, and I talk about hashtag first world protests, where they go out and protest certain things that in other countries and other times they wouldn't even consider that to be an issue because they don't even have the comfort level to even have that to be something available for enough people to deal with for it to actually be negative according to the expectations of said people and then go down. For example, the myriad of protests about illegal immigrants, with illegal immigrants actually in the country and being supported by the citizenry. Wherever you stand on that actual argument, on should there be more migration, are these people illegal, are these people undocumented, you have a situation where first the country is good enough for so many people to actually want to enter, there's enough actual welcoming people within the country for them to actually support and be there. There's enough confidence level and comfort of the people who entered the country in an unlawful by the government, by the laws of the land way, to actually count on other aspects of that government and laws of the land to grant them the protection to actually protest without just being rounded up and taken away and the rest of the populace has been like, we don't care because we have enough things to deal with. That is a sort of first world protest, in my opinion. And I think that is something to kind of actually be positive about. That is one of the great aspects of the United States of America. Whether people might not consider it positive or not is something that I'm willing to debate. Now, Amendment number 2, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, this is a key one. This is something that comes into contention. There's some people who say, okay, we need more gun control. We need to take this away. Some people are like, hey, we need to just have tanks. So they talk about, okay, this is when it comes to, is it a living document or is it, you're an originalist? Is it supposed to be the way it was written? Or what did they intend by that? Because at this time, people often say, they pretty much had muskets. But now should militias be allowed to have weapons of war, weapons that the army has? I don't know. What is a militia? Who has militias? I mean, there still are a few militias out there, but what is the actual with this? Should they be a standing army of the size that it is? But when it comes down to it, it's pretty much just, you can have guns. And Americans have a lot of guns. And that is something that I didn't quite understand as much, the appeal of it when I was still in high school and university and college in the United States of America, that in my older age, I've learned to appreciate the criminals are going to have the guns regardless. They're out there in the wild. You're hardly going to take them away from everyone. It's part of what the country was built on. It's in the Constitution. So that right to bear arms legally and protect yourself from people who are trying to violate yourself and your belongings and your family, I think is a positive thing since that threat is already there. This is something that is a point of contention for a lot of people out there. Amendment number 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in the time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by the law. I think a positive aspect of this one is it puts some regulation on the actual effects and activities of the US military. This reduces the chance of a despotic government just getting in, a despotic ruler coming in and just camping people out in neighborhoods. We're just going to have different posts of military posts all over the place and things like that. And I think a lot of the soldiers that sign up would be in that populace that has a higher level of actually having read the Constitution outside of education and having actually cared about something like this. And they value this. And this is something that I'm still relatively confident from the few soldiers that I do know and the actual little evidence that I have of searching and listening and hearing what soldiers have to say about certain topics. Those are some of the people that really care about the United States of America as a nation, based off of the Constitution and following that rule of law and that guidance. And I think a lot of them do value that. There have been some sporadic events of people at West Point, which is one of the top military academies, having, I think, a something with communism and things like this involved. That there's some edgelords out there, even in the military, but I think in general, they're a rather patriotic bunch that do value the Constitution, and I think would buck against acting in an overtly antagonistic manner against the actual people they have sworn to protect. Now, you could call me jaded on this, and we could discuss the actual aspects of the nature of the state, which has a monopoly of violence over a given area. I can get into that, but I think that's just my thoughts on this actual amendment number 3 and why it actually has some positive aspect of it, where the militias people don't think, okay, we just have to camp up because the actual state government now has 200,000 soldiers. So we have to do this because there's limitations for them to do the slow creep. By the time they actually round up from their separate military bases and actually get actions around the people, they'll have time to raise their militias and act in their own way against that threat. So that I think is one of the things that was considered. So you tie that in with the Second Amendment, the fact that the people have the guns in their homes and the military has to have the guns in the barracks or in the base. That is something that I think rested some people's minds. Okay, amendment number 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, this is a key thing. This is another key thing that I think is underestimated in the United States of America compared to other places in the world. There's many other places where people still to this day just get disappeared on a regular basis, and not in this whole conspiracy theory type of way of, oh, ex-president is going to open these camps and do this. What happened? Were there any camps? I haven't seen any camps in the last 4 years. Or, oh, this one person has this long list of people who disappear, happen to know them. Maybe have some more something behind it. But I think there's still coverage of it, and there's still some due process involved with that. And this whole due process thing is part of why I see a lot of certain groups coming up and protesting against what's going on in the United States of America. They see some situation and think, oh, this is egregious. But I looked into it, and there's something like 900 million police interactions over a year. And now we have a time where and I think this is a positive thing for it, is we have the ability to see the bad things a lot more often than we did in the past. My simple example of this was, let's say you had a neighborhood of 100 homes, and then 10 years ago, before you had actual surveillance in that place, there would be 10 burglaries a year. But since those 100 homes are spread apart, people don't all know each other, they hardly ever talk, maybe once in a while you bump into somebody. Every single person in that neighborhood, outside of those 10 people that actually had their houses burglared, even with them counting in, they might have only heard of 2 or 3, counting their own if they're one of the people. And in that situation, they think, okay, maybe this 2 or 3 burglaries a year is not too bad. Then you get to the present day, and things are connected. There is surveillance. Every single time a house is actually burgled, you actually see everything. You hear the details. You see the live thing. You can see video of the criminals actually entering the house. But there's only 3 burglaries a year. But those three burglaries are covered in full spectrum. You see every single aspect of it, all these different angles, all these people talking about how dangerous this is, how horrible this is, how it comes up. The next time there's another burglary, they bring up the last burglary. The next time there's another burglary, they bring up those two before. The next time there's another one, they even bring up the two or three from the years before and things like that. That might make it seem like it's a lot more dangerous. It's a lot more of an issue than it actually was 10 years ago when you hardly heard about the actual issue. And I think that is some of the things. There's a lot of improvements to be done in the police. Some of this reimagining the security system, I think that is a different story than the people who are calling for just defunding the police. And again, we can talk about the nature of the state. Are these enforcement agents? Are they inherently agents of force? That is a discussion I'm willing to have, but I'm trying to discuss why I think the amendments and why do I think the Constitution had these things and what parts did they play in building the nation that exists today, and how can these things be amended. So there could be some added amendments that address this into how the actual policing can be done, which I think is something that could be put on the table. Okay. Amendment number 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be witness against himself, nor be deprived life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Now, this is dealing with what happens after the enforcement agents of the state have come in and arrested you. And I think that is a key thing of just the judicial process itself. Go through the process, and people have had some faith and trust in the social construct that is the Constitution that builds the actual nation and keeps the nation of the United States of America together. And I think that's why right now, going on with the current issues with the election, let the process go through. That will, at least one way or the other, if you're confident that you won, then it will be, the numbers will be shown. If you're confident that the other person lost, then the numbers will be shown if there's some recounts. I'll at least let it go through the process. If you think there's no evidence, then if you trust enough in the system and the law, and maybe you don't, maybe that's the issue, but let the people produce their evidence and let them actually go through some sort of due process and have that evidence be shown to be false or not sufficient to actually prove anything that's happened. And that will gain some comfort in some groups in the society that could actually help to go forward, whichever way forward is going to come. So I think that is a positive thing that's in here. What else is in here? Something here talking about specific with the land or naval forces or the militia. Now, the army, the military, the Air Force, they have their separate court systems. And you see something coming up, I think, specifically in the schooling systems in the United States of America with certain kangaroo courts and certain localized things. And they have certain systems of law. And this is one thing that I mentioned. A government isn't necessarily the state. There is a state government, but there's governing bodies within other institutions. 2 or 3 people can come together. 2 people can come together. Even you personally can be a government of your own. You can be your own president. And I have some merchandise with that. Just hashtag my own president, where you can be your own president, preside over your own things. But that whole idea of being a president, that whole idea of governing something, is something that can be done by many different levels. That's why there's governors and things like that. The governor is not necessarily the governor of the government in the entire nation. That's a different level of things. So it doesn't have to be via a state. It's just some body or some body in the sense of a group that is responsible for ordering and laying out the set and agreed ways that the parties that it has authority over interact. I think that's just something off the top of my head. I didn't want to actually go and look at it, and I was trying to avoid using the actual word in the definition of the thing, which is something that people often do. That is something that I think you can kind of avoid. Okay, no. Before I get to the next amendment, there is one thing here with the private property. I think that is another thing, just the valuation and importance and acknowledgement of private property, where you don't have things just state-owned. This, again, takes away that aspect of the government, of the state just coming in and saying, okay, we're just going to seize the means of production. No, we're going to ensure. This ensures there actually is the ability for people to have private property and say, okay, if I actually look in this area and I follow the laws in this area and I invest my time, I'll actually have some sort of guarantee or expectation to actually reap the profits from my efforts here. and not just have something fluctuate. That's where when you have a system where there's laws constantly fluctuating up and down, some people might be like, okay, I don't necessarily know if I come here and actually invest in this and then they change the laws around, maybe this thing I've invested in can now become something that the government takes away. Or I'm not able to do this thing anymore because the people I'm dealing with are not actually on there. If I'm dealing with something that is a government thing and it's just based on the administration that comes in and they change around, then they enter and then they say, okay, now we had this deal with you, but it's null and void because we're a different entity now. So there's something that brings some more stability when you actually enshrine or understand the value of private property in that sense. And I think with that one, that's enough in there, and I think these are the thoughts that they might have had at that time that helps them to actually come in and actually get out. And they understand, of course, there is a different thing when you actually have a situation of war, and that is some of the issues with these constant wars being declared, the war on drug, war on poverty, war on this and that have given the state in the United States of America some excuses to do certain things, war on terror. There's certain declarations based on situations that, to me, have led to the government overreaching in its mandate. But that is something, again, that we can discuss separately. I'm just trying to think of what was actually thought of in this Constitution. And getting back to that. Amendment number 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory processes for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Now, with this one, I think the main aspects of this that are important to me, this is in no particular order, is the right to counsel. So that's just somebody to give you ideas of what is going on. So if you're illiterate, if you're unaware of what has actually happened in the place, you can actually be informed of this is kind of what happened. Now, I guess there's no assurance here that you actually knew of the law before, but that is something that is expected that as an adult, that's why as a child you'd be on a different kind of thing, but as an adult you're expected, if you're going around the world an adult of sound mind, you should be aware of the laws of the place that you're inhabiting or located at or moving to or migrating through. So that's kind of the expectation there. But here it says, okay, now you have the assistance to counsel. So that is something that they can provide you with, or you should actually find on your own. That's something that is guaranteed. I think that is a positive thing, because you might not understand the law anywhere close to as much as the people who are persecuting you for that law are. The next one I think is key is when they're dealing with witnesses here, where you actually face your accuser, face the evidence against you, and then you can actually bring people out to say, look, this is where I was, this is who I am, this is why I haven't done this is why I'm thinking this. That is another key thing that is not guaranteed. There have been situations where people just grab you, disappear you, you go away. That is enshrined in here. People need to understand that this is not something to take for granted. Still today, that is not something that majority of the countries in the world don't have something like this similarly in their actual basis of them being a nation. Most nations, I think, still are able to just disappear people. And I think that's the other part that I'm talking about here. Enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial and an impartial jury of the state and district where you're in. So this is another thing where there used to be an ability to just grab people and just put them to sit somewhere, and you don't have to actually deal with it. Now, there are issues where if you actually look at the way it actually has come to be, the state has grown, the actual regulation has grown, the size of it has mutated into something massive, into some behemoth, into some leviathan, where you have, I think, 95% or so, 90% more at least, of the cases that actually go into charges don't actually get to court. They're normally plea dealed out before somebody confesses, or these kind of things happen because if you actually had the system to say, let's actually have a speedy thing where everyone actually gets to see a judge, everybody actually sits in front of a jury, even with the jury duty things, I think you'd have probably 5% of the country on automatic, always being on jury duty. It would just be constant type of thing. And the bog, and it would just slow down to a complete creep, even as it is right now with the speedy and public trial. It's often a thing where it's like, okay, if this case is of middling importance, it's going to be 6 months to a year when the actual case is actually going to be in there. Person gets arrested, the charges get put on. There's normally a few months with that one. They could be bail, they could be things like this, and you come back and you get your actual hearing, your arraignment. And it's like, okay, we've heard this, we're going to accept this sort of case, and then now you're going to come back in a few years, and then you're actually going to have the actual case at that time. That is a typical kind of thing for a middling crime in the United States of America, I think, in a decently populated area. Now, in the past and even today, for some people, you take them away from their job, you take them away from their family, even for just a couple of days. That could be something rather terrible. So you have this situation where it says, okay, if you actually accuse speedy and public trial in a smaller location, where they get the thing where it's like, okay, first of all, you can have the bail, of course, and I think that comes up later on here, where you can have that situation where you can actually leave and go out. And if that bail thing, I think the bail thing does come up later on. So there's a way to not just say I'm going to ruin this person by just throwing them into jail because some random person accused me. I actually have to produce the accuser. I have to produce a lawyer that can tell them, oh, they're actually holding you here against your actual rights. These are your rights that you have. You can actually leave. And these are just good protections in general. Okay, moving on to amendment number 7. In suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States and according to the rules of common law. Now, with this one, this is a good example of how just changing some wording around can throw someone off. Like when you read suits at common law, am I thinking the civil courts or what is this? And yeah, it's civil courts. This is dealing with contracts. This is lawsuits. That's what they're talking about with suits at common law. So $20. Okay, with this one I checked. I've been trying to just go off the top of my head in this review and ideas, but I checked because I wanted to be sure. $20 in 1791 is worth $553.79 today. So that's with just a change in this inflation. This the money's going on. So that's the equivalent that they're talking about. And people look at the United States of America from the outside, or even Americans themselves, and think, "Oh, wow, that's not that much money." Americans are wealthy, but a lot of Americans, as we've seen during the current global situation that's happening, are really not that liquid. There's a lot of people, very few people actually have, I think less than 50% of the population actually have $1,000 just sitting in their bank account for emergencies. I remember hearing this back when I was still, I think, in college, still in my early 20s, and being taken aback, like, wow, if somebody has a broken arm, it's just an emergency, and they don't really have the insurance for it, that could actually put them into a poorhouse. And we're seeing right now with these shutdowns, and then when you have this money's being sent out, it's like, oh, here's $1,200, and some people saying, "Oh, that's peanuts, that's nothing," but for some people that is life-saving. So that is something to just keep in mind, and with this whole changing of things. But it's essentially what they're talking about here was just saying, okay, you actually have some protection for your actual property. And I think this again goes back to what I was talking about before with private property, and this talks about suits of common law that covers things that aren't just outright criminal. Somebody just coming and punching you in the face is already a crime. So that's already covered in certain things. And I think with that one has the jury. So this one they're talking about specific with a trial by jury. I think if it's something that's a misdemeanor, if it's smaller, it's a decision that can be made, I think, with just a judge. But there's also a separate arbitration. As I mentioned before, there's many cases that don't actually go in. There's a lot of private arbitrators that are outside of the actual state legal system that handle a lot of these things. But when it comes to this, if you want to take it to the actual state, there's actually provisions for it, where it's not just an assault. It's not just a clear thing, somebody knifed me, somebody punched me, somebody hit me. That's already covered. This is a situation where if you had a contract with somebody to say, okay, you two people will show up at this location and punch each other in the face because it's some kind of boxing match, and then I will hold the actual venue and then we'll get some profits from it. One of the people decides they're going to break the contract and not show up, and then you're out at least $533.79 because you rented the actual location for the thing or other things. Now, in that situation, you can take that contract you had with that individual and take them to the court of law. And then at this point, a jury of your peers can then decide on the actual case that is provided by either side. Okay, amendment number 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So yes, this one is where indentured servitude, things like that, will be considered cruel and unusual. Where you can't say, okay, this person owes this person this, so now this person is going to be their slave, has to leave their home and live with this other person until this person has achieved X amount. There still are some injurious things where people get sued and they just they just bail. There is the unfortunate situation of the inverse where some people are just so wealthy, some companies and some bodies are so wealthy and so well off that they understand that, hey, we can just outlast this person. This person still has to pay court costs, has to pay all these things, so we'll just outlast it. So that's the negative thing. But when it comes to the actual thing, excessive bail shall not be required, where it's a saying, okay, we cannot just put you in here. And with bail, the system of bail is essentially you have to put some money down, so it kind of guarantees that when the court case actually comes up, when the arraignment actually comes up, you will come back, because if you don't actually come back, that money you put down is forfeited. So that money is supposed to have a sliding scale according to the means of the person who's actually up for trial. If you're a billionaire, chances are you have some kind of high flight risk. Your bill will be $1 million or something for the same crime that an average college student who has just no real family or anything for doing that crime might have a bail of $500 because they understand that this person only has that $1,000 in their bank account, so they want to come back for that half. So that's the kind of thing that I think has in mind here, and I think that is a practical thing. Again, this is also to defend against people just being arrested and thrown into some jail and just absurd amounts of money being put up just to ruin the person and harm them in that kind of way. I think that that is something that they had in mind at the time. Okay, amendment number 9. An enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now here with the enumeration, I think that's just the numbers in here, just saying that you can't just add something in the Constitution to cancel out another right that's already in there. You can amend things and adjust things and suggest things in that manner, but it shouldn't just be like, okay, freedom of speech, then you have the 28th Amendment, be like, okay, you don't have freedom of speech. There should be some kind of amendment to change it and say, okay, maybe there's speech in such venues, in such locations, that maybe this isn't considered the freedom of speech that we were talking about in that First Amendment. I think that's the kind of thing that they have in mind here, and I think that was also put in there just to have the people have trust, because, again, this is something that people need to understand. This is something exceptional in the United States of America, to have somewhere that actually follows some rule of law, to have some kind of trust and belief in some kind of system, when the actual reality of the world is people lie. People are conniving. People will just cheat and steal. People in positions of power will be tempted by that to do things to their benefit, where they say, okay, we're going to bring you in with this. It's like, okay, we got you. And then they switch around the things. I'm changing the plan. Pray don't change the plan anymore. That is what happens. And I think that is something that we've seen with a lot of politicians. And I think people are at least unconsciously aware that they don't really expect truth and honesty from their politicians. Okay. Now, amendment number 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, this is a we the people part. This is a power of the people thing. And this is why I talked about earlier in this, about if you want something like the direct democracy, the one-to-one vote, popular vote for the presidency of the United States of America, that is something that is not in the Constitution yet. The states have certain powers and things to have the Electoral College. You can't just have other states decide who will preside over you at the federal level unless you use the system in there, because that is what certain people in certain states are saying. They're saying, because my state at this time still prefers a direct democracy, I want to impose that on every other state. But that is not a law that the federal government has the ability to impose on any other state in deciding who will preside over them on the federal level. So the federal government is delegated to by the United States Constitution to have a convention of states in which they can have an amendment, and then at that point the federal government can impose on the other states a president that has been selected by a popular vote of all the states under that agreement, under that constitution, that social agreement, that social contract. So that is something to keep in mind. Just as the way the people themselves have that power to actually nominate and actually vote directly for the delegates that would take their case, make the case for them into the actual convention of states and then have that. Now, I don't know how many people actually came together to have that 27th Amendment for the senators. How many people were voting for that, saying, yeah, we want to make sure that our senator can keep their $100,000 or $250,000 salary all the way through. Now, some things like that might have been put in because they're saying, oh, if you have enough of a salary to this person, then it actually maintains or reduces the chance of them actually being bribed or corrupted in that sense. But let me know what you think the effect of that has been when you have so many people entering in certain standards and then leaving as millionaires and things like that. There's questionable things going on in there. So I think for me that's me reading this. With this, I was going through this. It's getting up to an hour here. What I will do is I'll have a separate video where I'm just reading the amendments themselves, and then I'll have this one where it's just the whole thing with the amendments and my talk over review ideas. And wherever you may be listening to this or watching this, please come back again. I shall be reading and posting soon the amendments 11 through 27. I already have, if you are listening and watching this, wherever it is, the Constitution itself will already be up. And that one I didn't really break down that much of an analysis like I did with this one on a point by point, but I'll do that point by point as well with 11 through 27 and do that similar format where I'll just have one where I pretty much just read through them and then do a separate one, or then do an entire one where I do the reading through them and the commentary on them after. So that's it for now. As I said on the screen, they should be, if you're watching the video, a speed drawing of James Madison. With the Constitution one, I had George Washington. I'm not quite sure who I'm going to have on 11 through 12, through 27, sorry. I shall look into that, but when that's up, that will be up as well, with a link to the merchandise store where you can buy that merchandise and all these other things on it. And that merchandise is my Anyone But K series, where I take Che Guevara, and I think people have him on the shirt without really understanding who he was about, and I think he was a rather despotic, garbage sort of human being. He might have done some positive things for a few people who might think he's a good person, but I think in general, the mythos around him is a lot separate from the person that he is. And I see something like that happening with the founding fathers of the United States of America. They were definitely flawed. People just sucked more in the past than they do today. And part of the reason we don't suck as much as we did in the past is the good aspects of the founding fathers, which includes documents like the Constitution of the United States of America. Despite the negative things that they were doing and other people were doing at that time and other people continue to do now, they had this and we've built off of that, and we have what we have now to have the ability to look back on them and like, hold our nose up and like, look at you, look, you mess, you muck. But can we come up with something like this? What would it take for you to come up with something like this? If you can come up with something to counter the Constitution, I'm willing to see what is this social contract that you think we can actually live on that is preferable to the Constitution. Because I do think it is possible to improve on this outside of even the amendment system, but I'm not quite sure how. And if I do figure that out, I might let you know. I mean, something with the non-aggression principle, at least acknowledging that, focusing on individuality, which I think is some parts in here, just trying to have more communication and understanding, which is something that is resulting in this. So there are other things that I think could build up parts of it, but how it comes in the practical nature of having this many varied people come together is something that I'm not quite sure has been bested than this Constitution and the ability to amend it. But I'll see that as I get into reading some other constitutions of other countries that are more recent. Okay. So that's it for now. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you very much for listening. Till next time, this has been Silas. Goodbye.